Geir Pedersen may have opened the door to ending the 8.5-year war in Syria, but the question remains, will the Constitutional Committee be able to function without interference from the regime? I'm Frank Uciardo. I sat down with Geir Pedersen for One-on-One Express on TRT World. Geir Pedersen, thank you for joining us here on TRT World One-on-One Express.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So tell us about the recent breakthrough that you made where your predecessor wasn't able to do that for years as far as assembling a constitutional committee for Syria, which seemed almost impossible at one point.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think we have to look at many different factors. Obviously, this has been what I call a good teamwork, where different people have been sort of making sure to draw this in the same direction. As you will recall, I said to the Security Council when I gave my first briefing that my first task would be to build confidence and trust with the Syrian government and with the Syrian opposition. And I made also one of my 5 priorities to work with the international community and to build trust with them and also try to establish trust between Syria and the international community. I think we have been successful to build that trust with the Syrians, but also I have been lucky to have the full support of the international community. And I think it's a combination of this, and as I usually say that the stars aligned, and this made it possible for us to move forward on the Constitutional Committee. But first and foremost, of course, this was a decision by the government and a decision by the opposition SNC. So credit goes first and foremost to them, I think.
Talk about the composition of the Constitutional Committee. Who's on it? What it's made up of? Which parties are part of it?
Yeah, so we have sort of 3 main elements. It's 50 representatives from the government, 50 representatives from the opposition, and then 50 civil society representatives. And the 50 coming from each of these groups, of course, the 50 coming from the government is selected by the government, the 50 from the opposition selected by the opposition, while the 50 in the middle is the process where the UN has then been involved and facilitated the emergence of these 50 people.
When do you name their names? When do we know who they are?
We are now making sure that we have reached out to all of them, so that all of them are aware of that they will be asked to serve on the committee, and when that process is finished, the names will be made public. The second aspect of this is, of course, that we've been working on the so-called rules of procedures or the terms of reference for the committee. That will be made public on Monday when I will be briefing the Security Council. But I think it's fair to say that the main elements is already known. And that, of course, is that this will be a committee that will strive to work towards consensus. And if it is not possible to have consensus, it will be a 75% voting threshold. And then it outlines the mandate. It says that there will be co-chairs, one from the opposition and one from the government. It outlines the role of the United Nations as facilitators. And then there is a strong paragraph on the security of the members of the Constitutional Committee and their families.
I was about to ask you about that because
Yes.
Being a member of this committee could be very dangerous.
It should not be, because this is about helping to form a constitution that will hopefully serve the aspirations of the Syrian people. And this is, after the agreement of the government and the opposition to this, and both of them see this as an historic achievement. So hopefully we can now unite behind this and use this, as I said, as an opportunity to really listen to the aspirations of the Syrian people and to develop a constitution.
What, if any, role will the PYD, which is the PKK terror group's Syrian wing, play in this whole scenario?
The PYD is not part of the opposition, and it is not part of the government, and it's not part of the civil society. So we will have Kurdish representatives in the committee, but there will be sort of no from the organized group that you mentioned.
So none of these people will be represented?
No, you know, we want to make sure that we have a broad segment of the Syrian people. All sort of the different segments should be there on the committee, and it's important that the different communities feel that they are represented and that the different political affiliations are represented. But obviously the composition of the committee, like the rules of procedure, is a compromise. And as all compromises, this is of course not perfect, but it's the best possible.
Getting to this point took passing a Security Council resolution 2254.
Yes.
Explain for us why that was important in endorsing the Geneva Communique, because I think a lot of people are wondering, well, did one necessarily need the other?
No, I think, you know, this, you know, as you will recall, 2254 was adopted in December 2015. At the time, the war had been going on for, I think people felt, for too long. And I believe that the focus then was on sort of how to make sure that you could move forward and not look back. But I think there was then already a tradition. You had the Geneva Communique, and one wanted to show that there was a, you know, that there was no break with the past, but that there was a continuation in working for finding a solution to this. And I think for many it was not seen to be a contradiction between the Geneva Communique and the resolution 2254.
Now, what is the UN doing to ensure the release of the hundreds of thousands of political prisoners involved in this whole conflict?
This has also been one of my priorities, one of my 5 priorities. And as you know, it's mentioned also in Security Council Resolution 2254. So we are working on this along 2 tracks. We have a committee with the UN, with Turkey, with Iran and Russia, that are meeting on a regular basis and are trying to see if we could have release both from the government and from the opposition. We have so far had 4 rounds of these releases. In my opinion, the numbers are far too low, and it's sort of more like it's been developed into more of a sort of prisoner of war exchange. We need to see much more substantial releases of people. So I have appealed that it could be possible to have start with women and children, and that we need to do this at scale, that is, with a substantial number of people should be released. And we believe that if this is done in a proper manner, of course it will send a very important humanitarian signal, and it will create clarity for all the too many Syrians that are wondering what has happened to their loved ones. But it could also be then a confidence-building measures that could help us to heal the division within the Syrian society. So this, I believe, is extremely important.
What is the UN doing to ensure the safety of Syrians who are returning home? That's a very sticky question right now.
You know, the High Commissioner for Refugees having an active dialogue, of course, with the Syrian government, also with Turkey, with Lebanon, and with Jordan. And this is, you know, a discussion I think they should be allowed to continue. It's sort of not my responsibility, but I can assure you that this is something that the UN is following very closely, and that there has been many discussions, and I have also, of course, been part of discussions on this. And there are several ways where we could contribute, I think, to, if the refugees want to return, to make sure that it is voluntarily, that it is safe and dignified.
A lot of people ask how the UN can continue to provide aid, or even want to provide aid, to Syria, and even perhaps reconstruct part of it, when there are still people being bombed in hospitals and civilians being targeted by the Assad regime and its ally and Russia.
I think this is a misunderstanding. What the UN is doing is providing humanitarian assistance. And humanitarian assistance, as we know, is an obligation. And the humanitarian assistance is going both to areas controlled by the government and areas not controlled by the government. So this is a principle that the UN is following. When it comes to reconstruction, this is an issue where the donors themselves have very strong opinions. The UN, as you know, has no funds by themselves. So it would not be possible for the UN to do this reconstruction without the support of the donor community, and we are not there yet.
It's interesting you say there, because I know I'm speaking to some key members of the Security Council, particularly from the EU members.
Yes.
They are not satisfied in any way that they want to put up any money at all until the Assad regime stops completely any kind of military activity.
Yeah, I've also met with a number of European leaders during the General Assembly, and I think what I'm hearing is that they are asking for what they call a credible political process to be launched. And my hope, of course, is indeed that we will see this, because we need to see a new Syria. We need to see a Syria where there is changes on the ground, where we have a real political process, and where refugees are returning, and where we could see reconstruction. So I think we all agree that this needs to happen, and that we cannot continue to have a situation with more than 3 million refugees in Turkey, more than 1 million in Lebanon, and up to close to 1 million in Jordan. This could create, this is a potential belt of instability. So it's in all our interest. It's in the interest of the Syrians, the Syrian people, to have the return. It's the interest of the neighboring countries, and I think of the international community at large.
But what about the border countries? What about Turkey's security? What about U.S. troops actually illegally being in Syria? That's a violation.
Security Council Resolution 2254 starts by stating the importance of respecting Syria's territorial integrity, its sovereignty, and its independence. And I think we all agree that the existence of what I say 5 armies in Syria could be a potential threat to not only the security of Syria, but also to the region. So I think for me, it just highlights the importance of finding a political solution to this conflict that will help the Syrian people find back to stability, build trust within the community, and will also lead to that these armies will be out of Syria.
You're going to be part of that process. How long is that going to take to really get the people out of Syria militarily who don't belong there, secure the border for Turkey, but also guarantee security for Syria's government?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you how long it would take, but what is important is that with the Constitutional Committee, we have a potential door opener to a broader political process, and that political process would then bring those elements into play that we are talking about. And this will obviously not happen over the night, but if we manage to do this in a proper manner, hopefully we will see steady progress moving forward.
So what are your next steps now? I mean, this has been, how long have you been in this process, and what lies ahead on the road for you?
I started in January, so time is flying. But what I'm now discussing with the 2 parties is how we can move forward with confidence building measures. We are discussing, how could we fulfill our mandate in Security Council Resolution 2254 on a nationwide ceasefire, and how can we see changes on the ground in Syria that would bring a new Syria. And here I've been discussing if we could do what I call step by step, so that we see changes taking place in Syria that will be responded to also by the international community.
But what I'm also hearing from you here is that there's a lot of work to be done, but you somehow have gotten the trust of all sides in this whole scenario, but the fighting hasn't stopped. How do you get the sides to stop the fighting? How do you get these so-called terrorists that the Syrians are claiming are still in there, and that's why they're bombing to stop.
No, this is the big question. Obviously, here we are, we are working also with the Russians and the Turkish government, and we are following up. The Secretary General is very active in, obviously, in following this very carefully. We understand that the situation, of course, in Idlib is extremely complex. It is no easy solution to it. But we have to continue, and we have to broaden it to see also if we can find a political solution to the situation in Idlib. A solution that would help us to establish the nationwide ceasefire I have talked about, and would then strengthen the attempts we are making at finding a more comprehensive political solution to the crisis.
I think you are very sensitive to the issue of refugees in political situations. And could this actual spiral out of control create another wave of refugees across Europe and the Middle East?
We see now that the fighting is not at the same level as it was before the last talks between Presidents Putin and Erdogan. And hopefully this will hold also for the future. But if we should see, renewed fighting in Idlib at the same level as we've seen before, and as we know, the last round of fighting led to more than 400,000 people being displaced, that would really be a humanitarian disaster that could have unforeseen consequences. So we do whatever we can and continue to work very hard to make sure that this is indeed not happening.
Closing, what was your last conversation like with the Secretary General when you updated him on your progress?
He was, of course, I've been in close touch with the Secretary General all the time on this, and have received his full support and backing all along. And he was, of course, extremely pleased that finally we managed to find a way out of this, and that we can conclude that we now have an agreement on the Constitutional Committee. So, and I know that this is, for him, also an important achievement in the area of peace and security, and that it hopefully can bring also some input to move, as I said, the process forward in the weeks and months ahead.
And this really relies on the Syrian government not interfering with the operation of the Constitutional Committee, correct?
Well, let me put it like this. The Syrian government has selected 50 members that would serve on the Constitutional Committee. It's now up to them to work together with the 50 members of the opposition and the 50 members of the civil society. They need to build trust among themselves. They need to develop ideas on how to move forward in the best interest of the Syrian people. And I'm confident that we will see progress on this.
And Geir Pedersen, the Special UN Envoy to the Syria process, will be there. Thank you for joining us on TRT World.
Thank you for having me. Really an honor.